I think my wife is pregnant. Sharpshooter! Sharpshooter!
Our pregnant wife. Me.
I swear I will change.
You already told the whole market I'm pregnant.
Adaeze's hands trembled violently as she stuffed her clothes into a bag, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face, while Chika knelt before her on the cold floor, holding her legs tightly and crying like a child. "Please don't leave me," he begged desperately, his voice shaking with fear. "I will change. I swear I will change." But Adaeze looked at him with deep pain in her eyes. "You already told the whole market I'm pregnant before I could even tell my own husband myself," she said bitterly. "There's nothing left in this marriage that belongs to only us anymore." Outside, neighbors had already gathered quietly near the door, whispering and listening, because once again, Chika's loud mouth had turned his home into public entertainment. But this time, the woman he loved was finally ready to walk away forever. What kind of man cannot keep even his own marriage secret? And can a talkative husband truly change before he loses everything? Watch till the end, because this story will make you laugh, cry, and think deeply about marriage, love, and the danger of an uncontrolled tongue. And please, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel and join our growing family of powerful African stories. Chika was the only son born into a house full of women. Before his mother, Mama Ngozi, finally gave birth to him, she had already given birth to many daughters. So, from the very first day Chika opened his eyes to the world, all he saw around him were women. Women cooking, women laughing, women gossiping, women arguing, women singing while pounding yam. Even as a little boy, instead of running outside with other boys, Chika preferred sitting inside the smoky kitchen beside his mother and sisters. While boys his age climbed mango trees, chased goats, wrestled in the sand, and followed their fathers proudly to the farm, Chika sat comfortably beside the women, his small hands resting under his chin as he listened carefully to every discussion happening around him. "Hey, did you hear what happened at Mama Uche's house yesterday?" one woman would whisper softly. Before the woman could even finish talking, Chika's eyes would widen with excitement. He would shift closer immediately. "What happened? Tell me, he would ask impatiently. The women would laugh loudly. "This child again," one of his sisters would say. "Chika, go outside and play with your mates." But Chika would refuse stubbornly. "No, their games are boring. I want to hear the story." The women laughed because of how funny he sounded, but his mother sometimes worried secretly. Chika talked too much for a child. Too much. His voice was always the loudest in the compound. He laughed loudly, he interrupted conversations constantly. If two adults were speaking quietly, somehow Chika would suddenly appear beside them like a spirit. "What are you people talking about?" he would ask shamelessly. And once he heard any secret, that secret was already in danger. Before sunset, half the neighborhood would hear it from Chika's own mouth. One afternoon, his older sister Amara called him quietly behind the house. She looked around carefully before speaking. "Chika, come here." Chika ran to her immediately. "What is it?" Amara lowered his voice. "Promise me you will not tell anybody what I'm about to say." Chika nodded quickly. "I promise. Serious promise. I swear." She smiled shyly and whispered, "I like Obina." Chika gasped dramatically. "That tall Obina that carries firewood?" Amara covered his mouth quickly. "Shh, keep quiet. Nobody knows yet." Chika nodded again excitedly. "I will not tell anybody." But before evening, several women were already laughing near the stream. "So Amara likes Obina?" one woman asked loudly. Another woman burst into laughter. "That Chika's mouth will destroy this family one day." Amara heard them while returning from fetching water. Her face burned with shame immediately. Obina himself became embarrassed after hearing the rumor spread everywhere. When Amara returned home, tears filled her eyes. "Mama," she cried angrily, "Chika has told everybody."
Mama Nguzi turned sharply toward Chika, who was still laughing proudly in one corner. "Chika," she shouted, "did you tell people your sister's secret?" Chika blinked innocently. "But it was sweet gist." Before he could run, Mama Ngozi grabbed a broom immediately. "Today you will learn," she shouted as she chased him round the compound. Chika screamed and laughed at the same time, while the broom landed repeatedly on his legs. "Mama, sorry, sorry." But even while crying, he kept laughing. "But it was sweet gist." His sisters became furious. "Never tell Chika anything again," one shouted. "His mouth is bigger than a market drum." That night, Papa Ejike sat quietly outside, deeply troubled. He watched his son carefully as Chika sat among his sisters again, talking endlessly without resting. The old man shook his head slowly. "This boy is growing like a woman," he muttered sadly. "If care is not taken, his mouth will bring shame one day." From the next morning, Papa Ejike decided to change his son. Before sunrise, he woke Chika up. "Stand up," he ordered firmly. Chika rubbed his sleepy eyes. "Where are we going?" "To the farm. You are a man." Chika groaned immediately. "But Mama and my sisters are making akara this morning." "Forget akara," Papa Ejike snapped. "Follow me." At the farm, Papa Ejike tried teaching him serious work. "Hold the hoe properly," he instructed. But instead of concentrating, Chika kept talking non-stop. "Papa, did you hear that Mama Uche's goat entered somebody's kitchen yesterday?" Papa Ejike ignored him. Few minutes later, Chika continued. "And Auntie Chioma fought with her husband because he refused to buy her wrapper." Papa Ejike sighed heavily. "Face your work." But Chika continued again. "Papa, why are goats always looking stubborn? Even this goat near us is looking at me somehow." Then he suddenly turned toward the goat itself. "Why are you looking at me like that? Have you eaten today?" Papa Ejike dropped his hoe in frustration. "Chika," he shouted angrily, "can your mouth rest for 1 minute?" Chika quickly lowered his head. "Sorry, Papa." Silence finally came. Papa Ejike continued farming peacefully. But barely 2 minutes later, Chika spoke again softly. "Papa, do you think goats understand human language?" Papa Ejike closed his eyes slowly in exhaustion, while distant laughter from women cooking breakfast echoed across the village. As Chika grew older, Papa Ejike became more determined to turn him into what he called a real man. Every morning, he dragged him to the farm before sunrise. He taught him how to sharpen cutlasses, plant yam, and carry heavy baskets without complaining. Sometimes he invited respected men in the community to speak to him. "A man must learn discipline," one elder told Chika seriously. "Your mouth should not be faster than your brain." Chika nodded respectfully. "Yes, Papa." But before the old man even finished talking, Chika had already started another unrelated story. "That reminds me, do you know what happened between Mama Ifunaya and her husband yesterday?" The elders would exchange tired looks while Papa Ejike covered his face in frustration. No matter how hard his father tried, Chika always found himself returning to the women. Instead of sitting with men discussing farming and responsibilities, he sat beside women discussing marriages, quarrels, and family drama. "Eya, Chika, come and hear this one." Women often called him happily because he reacted dramatically to every story. "What happened?" Chika would ask excitedly, moving closer immediately. "Whose husband was caught this time?" The women laughed loudly around him because Chika behaved exactly like one of them. Sometimes he even added his own opinions. "I told you that man talks too much," he would say proudly, making everybody laugh harder. But not everybody found it funny. Some people mocked him secretly. "That boy's mouth is too loose," they whispered. "One day it will destroy him completely." Papa Ejike heard such comments often, and each time pain settled heavily in his chest. Sometimes at night, he sat outside quietly while watching his son entertain women with endless stories and laughter. Will this boy ever become responsible enough to lead a family? He wondered sadly. But as the years passed, Chika grew into a very handsome young man. He was lively, cheerful, and naturally funny. Wherever he entered, laughter followed him. People gathered around him because he always had stories to tell. At drinking spots, markets, and gatherings, Chika became the center of attention. "Chika, tell us another one," his friends would shout excitedly, and Chika never disappointed them. He exaggerated stories dramatically, changing his voice and acting out scenes until people nearly rolled on the ground laughing. But Chika had one dangerous problem. He had no boundaries. Absolutely none. He discussed people's private matters openly, even things he was never supposed to know. If a husband and wife fought secretly, somehow Chika will turn it into public entertainment before evening. Some people laughed with him, others avoided him carefully. "Do not say anything near Chika," people warned each other. "Your secret will become market news tomorrow." Then one afternoon, Chika saw Adaeze for the very first time. She was standing quietly among other young women, helping to arrange food during a gathering. Immediately Chika saw her, he stopped walking. Adaeze was calm, graceful, and respectful. Unlike the loud women he usually joked with, she spoke softly and carried herself with dignity. There was peace in her eyes. Chika could not stop staring. One of his friends laughed and pushed him lightly. "Close your mouth before flies enter inside." But Chika ignored him completely. Later that day, he gathered courage and approached Adaeze. "Good afternoon," he greeted proudly. Adaeze smiled politely. "Good afternoon." That simple greeting was enough. From that moment, Chika talked non-stop. "You know, people say I talk too much, but I don't believe them. How can talking be a problem? Even my father complains every day. My sisters too, especially Amara. One time she told me a secret and he kept talking. Adaeze barely spoke. Sometimes she only nodded quietly while Chika continued speaking for both of them. He even began telling her embarrassing stories about his own family. "One day, my mother chased me with a broom because I exposed my sister's secret," he said proudly before bursting into laughter. Adaeze laughed softly too. She found him funny and harmless at first. Inside her mind, she thought, maybe he is just excited because we are meeting for the first time. But Chika never stopped. During their courtship, Chika told his friends every detail about their relationship. "Adaeze smiled at me today. Adaeze said she likes calm men. Adaeze was angry yesterday because I came late." Even private conversations between them somehow became public discussion among his friends. One evening, Adaeze confronted him gently. "Chika, must you tell your friends everything?" Chika laughed carelessly. "They are my friends now. Besides, it is just ordinary gist." Adaeze forced a small smile, but deep inside, she felt uncomfortable. Still, she ignored the warning signs because despite everything, Chika had a cheerful heart that made people happy. And slowly, without realizing it, Adaeze began falling in love with the very man whose mouth never rested. The moment Adaeze finally accepted Chika's proposal, it was as if somebody poured fire inside his body. Chika lost control completely. Everywhere he went, he announced it proudly. "I am getting married," he shouted at the markets. At drinking spots, he bought drinks for people while explaining how beautiful Adaeze was. At ceremonies, he interrupted conversations just to remind people about his wedding. Even strangers who barely knew him heard the news before the families completed their discussions properly. One afternoon, Mama Ngozi pulled him aside angrily. "Chika, must your mouth announce everything?" she scolded. "Learn to close your mouth sometimes." But Chika only laughed carelessly. "Mama, is marriage a secret?" The wedding day finally came, colorful and lively. Music filled the air while guests danced happily. But Chika nearly turned the ceremony into a comedy show. He danced wildly in the middle of serious moments, grabbed microphones repeatedly, and cracked unnecessary jokes until some elders became uncomfortable.
If I knew marriage was this sweet, I would have married since, he shouted proudly, making younger guests burst into laughter. Adaeze smiled nervously beside him, while Papa Ejike sat quietly, his face filled with silent embarrassment. That night, after everybody left and silence finally settled around their home, Adaeze felt peaceful and happy. She believed marriage would now bring them closer privately. The next morning, she woke up shyly, expecting quiet intimacy between her and her husband. But Chika had already disappeared from the room. Excited like a child, he rushed straight to his mother and sisters. "Hey, let me tell you people what happened yesterday," he announced loudly. His sisters gathered immediately. "Chika," one screamed while laughing. But instead of stopping, Chika became even more dramatic. He acted scenes, exaggerated details, and spoke shamelessly while his sisters nearly rolled on the floor laughing. Mama Ngozi covered her face in embarrassment. "This boy has no shame," she muttered weakly. Suddenly, Papa Ejike walked into the room. Everywhere became silent immediately. The old man froze in disbelief after hearing the discussion. His face hardened with anger and shame. "Are you mad?" he thundered. "Is this how married men behave?" Chika laughed awkwardly. "Papa, I was only joking. Leave here immediately," Papa Ejike shouted furiously. "Go back to your wife." But instead of returning home, Chika went straight to the usual gathering spot where his friends sat drinking and laughing. "My people," he shouted excitedly, "you will not believe what happened last night." His friends screamed loudly and dragged him into their circle immediately. Chika narrated everything proudly while they rolled on the floor laughing. Some asked disgusting questions. "So what did she say after that?" one friend asked wickedly. Chika answered proudly, without shame. Unknown to him, an elderly man sat quietly nearby hearing every single word. By evening, whispers had already started spreading slowly among women. Later that day, Adaeze noticed strange laughter as she passed by some women. "That is Chika's wife," one whispered. Another woman laughed softly. Adaeze's heart dropped immediately. She understood at once. Her husband had carried their private life outside again. She lowered her eyes quietly and continued walking, but deep inside, something painful cracked in her heart. Adaeze truly tried to adjust to marriage. She told herself constantly that no man was perfect. She tried to endure Chika's behavior quietly and focus on the good parts of him. But living with Chika was like living inside an open marketplace where every private matter became public discussion before sunset. Chika had no filter at all. Whenever they argued, neighbors somehow heard about it immediately. If Adaeze mistakenly added too much salt to soup one day, Chika would laugh about it loudly at the market. "My wife nearly poisoned me yesterday," he would joke while people laughed. If Adaeze woke up late after a stressful night, Chika would announce it carelessly to his friends. "Marriage has made my wife lazy," he would say proudly. One afternoon, Adaeze sang softly while bathing inside their house, not knowing Chika's friend was outside. Before evening, Chika had already narrated the story dramatically. "You should hear the way my wife sings inside the bathroom," he laughed. His friends burst into laughter while Adaeze sat quietly inside the house, her face burning with shame. Nothing remained private anymore. At the market, Chika's voice was always the loudest. He mocked people jokingly and exposed sensitive matters carelessly. "Hey, is your husband still sleeping outside because of the quarrel?" he once asked a woman publicly. People laughed loudly, but the woman walked away embarrassed. Some women even stopped talking whenever Chika appeared near them. "Be careful," they whispered to each other. "If Chika hears it, the whole market will hear it tomorrow." Slowly, Adaeze began changing. The cheerful young woman became quiet and withdrawn. She stopped sharing personal things with her husband because she no longer trusted his mouth. Anytime Chika stepped outside, fear entered her heart immediately. What will he say today? She often wondered silently. Some nights, after Chika fell asleep peacefully, Adaeze cried quietly alone in the darkness. But whenever she tried explaining her pain, Chika only laughed carelessly.
You are too serious. Can't somebody joke again? He never truly understood the damage he was causing. One afternoon, Adaeze finally broke down emotionally. She traveled to visit her parents and immediately burst into tears before her mother. "Mama, I am tired," she cried painfully. "My husband tells everybody everything. Nothing in my marriage belongs to only us anymore." Her mother listened quietly while Adaeze explained all the embarrassment and humiliation she had been enduring. After a long silence, the older woman sighed deeply and held her daughter's hand gently. "My daughter, marriage is not easy. Every home has its problems. Try and manage your home first." Adaeze lowered her eyes sadly. That was not the comfort she hoped to hear. But quietly, she wiped her tears, stood up and returned back to her husband's house, carrying the heavy pain alone inside her heart. After enduring quietly for so long, Adaeze finally gathered courage and complained to Papa Ejike and Mama Ngozi. The old couple listened carefully while she explained how Chika exposed every private matter in their home. As she spoke, Papa Ejike's face darkened with anger and disappointment. He sent for Chika immediately. When Chika arrived smiling carelessly, his father stood up angrily. "Do you know what it means to be a husband?" he thundered. "A man protects his home, not expose it. Your wife is crying in shame while you are outside entertaining people." Chika lowered his head briefly. "Sorry, Papa," he muttered casually. But deep inside, he still did not truly understand the seriousness of his actions. And after that day, nothing changed. Then one morning, Chika noticed Adaeze vomiting repeatedly outside the house. Instead of rushing to comfort her, excitement exploded inside him immediately. His eyes widened. "Adaeze," he whispered dramatically, "are you pregnant?" Adaeze herself had only just started suspecting it. She smiled shyly and said softly, "I am not sure yet." But before she could even say another word, Chika had already rushed out of the compound. He ran straight to meet his friends. "My people," he shouted excitedly, "I think my wife is pregnant." His friends screamed loudly with excitement. "Sharp shooter," one shouted while slapping Chika's back. Another burst into laughter. Chika does not waste time. They mocked and laughed noisily while Chika smiled proudly like a champion. Later that afternoon, Adaeze walked quietly to the market after confirming the pregnancy properly. Her heart was full of happiness. She planned to return home and surprise her husband lovingly with the good news. But suddenly, loud voices called out behind her. "Our pregnant wife!" Chika's friends shouted playfully. Everybody turned immediately to stare at her. Adaeze froze completely. Women started smiling and congratulating her loudly. "Hey, congratulations! So Chika has already announced it?" Adaeze felt heat rise painfully into her face. In that painful moment, she understood everything. Chika had once again carried their private matter outside before she could even share it properly with him herself. Tears gathered in her eyes immediately, but she forced herself to remain calm. Silently, she finished her shopping and returned home with a broken heart. That evening, Chika returned happily from the market, expecting joy and celebration. Instead, he stopped suddenly after seeing Adaeze packing her clothes quietly into a bag. His smile disappeared immediately. "Adaeze, what is this?" he asked nervously. Adaeze looked at him with deep pain in her eyes. "I cannot live like this anymore," she said calmly. Chika laughed awkwardly at first. "Stop joking." But Adaeze continued, her voice trembling with hurt. "You do not protect this home. Everything becomes public entertainment to you." Fear entered Chika's body immediately. "Adaeze, no." He rushed toward her and fell to his knees. "Please don't leave me," he begged desperately. For the first time in his life, tears poured from his eyes genuinely. "I will change. I swear I will change." Adaeze remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "If after 1 month I hear our private matters outside again, I will leave immediately." From that day, Chika entered the hardest battle of his life. Keeping quiet felt like punishment. Sometimes stories pressed his chest so badly he almost felt sick. Many times he rehearsed conversations inside his head repeatedly, imagining how funny his friends would laugh if he told them. But each time, Adaeze's painful face returned to his mind, forcing him to swallow the words back down.
One afternoon, something funny happened between Chika and Adaeze inside the house. Adaeze accidentally spilled water on herself while arguing playfully with him, and the way she reacted made Chika laugh so hard his stomach nearly hurt. Immediately, the old habit rose inside him like fire. "My friends must hear this one," he shouted excitedly as he rushed outside. He walked fast toward their usual gathering spot, already rehearsing the story inside his head. "Then she shouted and nearly fell," he whispered to himself while laughing alone. But halfway down the road, his legs suddenly slowed. Adaeze's warning entered his mind sharply. "If after 1 month I hear our private matters outside again, I will leave immediately." Chika froze completely. For a few seconds, he stood there breathing heavily like a man fighting himself. Then, suddenly, he turned around dramatically and sprinted back home as if somebody was chasing him. From a distance, his friends spotted him. "Chika!" they shouted excitedly. "Come and gist us!" Chika quickly covered his mouth tightly with both hands and continued running away without answering. His friends burst into loud laughter. As days passed, they noticed his strange silence more and more. "Something is wrong with Chika," one friend whispered suspiciously. "Your wife has tied your mouth spiritually," another mocked loudly. Others laughed carelessly. "Marriage has finished you." Chika laughed weakly sometimes, but deep inside, the struggle was serious. Many times, words pushed against his mouth painfully, begging to come out. But each time he remembered Adaeze crying silently at night, his heart became heavy. Even his sisters started pressuring him for gossip again. "Chika, what happened in your house yesterday?" one asked playfully. "You people are too quiet these days," another sister smiled mischievously. "Or has Adaeze stopped talking to you?" Chika almost answered out of habit. Yesterday, she..." Suddenly, he stopped himself and quickly held his mouth shut with both hands. Everybody exploded into laughter immediately. "See him!" one sister shouted. "He is suffering!" But Chika remained determined quietly. Slowly, little by little, he began changing. He stayed home more often. He listened more carefully instead of interrupting people constantly. He spoke less. He became calmer. And for the very first time in their marriage, Adaeze slowly relaxed around him again. They started talking deeply at night. They laughed together privately. Chika discovered something he had never known before. Silence could also bring peace. As the months passed, Chika became more mature, more responsible, and more protective of his home. Even people around him noticed the difference. One evening, his friends shook their heads in disappointment. "You are no longer fun," one complained. But Chika only smiled quietly this time. For once in his life, he no longer cared what people thought about him.
Papai GK watched his son's transformation quietly over time. The loud, careless young man who once turned every private matter into public entertainment was slowly disappearing. One evening, as Adaeze finished arranging things inside the house, Papai GK called her gently. "Adaeze, come and sit down." She sat respectfully beside him while the old man remained silent for a moment, staring into the distance thoughtfully. Then emotion filled his eyes. "My daughter," he said softly, "you succeeded where we failed." Adaeze looked at him quietly. Papa Jike sighed deeply. I nearly lost hope in that boy long ago. I feared his mouth would destroy his future completely. He shook his head slowly before smiling faintly. But you taught him wisdom with patience. Adaeze's eyes became emotional immediately. She lowered her head humbly. He changed because he wanted to change, she replied softly. Months later, Adaeze finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment Chika carried his son for the first time, tears gathered in his eyes. Joy overwhelmed his entire body. But this time, he handled his happiness differently. He celebrated respectfully and carefully. He no longer carried private matters outside carelessly. Even when people asked unnecessary questions, Chika simply smiled quietly. "My family is fine," he would answer calmly. As his son grew, Chika became intentional about raising him differently. He taught him wisdom, discipline, and self-control. "Not everything you hear should leave your mouth," he often told the little boy gently. Papa Jike watched proudly from a distance, sometimes shaking his head in disbelief at the change inside his son. One peaceful evening, Chika sat outside beside Adaeze while their little son played happily nearby. The evening breeze moved softly around them as silence settled peacefully between husband and wife. Chika looked at Adaeze quietly for a long moment before speaking from his heart. "You saved my life and my home," he admitted sincerely. Adaeze smiled warmly. "A peaceful home is built by two people willing to grow," she replied softly. Chika nodded slowly while watching his son laugh in the distance. Finally, he truly understood something life had been trying to teach him for years. Not every story should leave the walls of a home. Some people destroy their homes not through violence, but through lack of wisdom. Privacy protects dignity. Marriage survives through trust. A careless tongue can destroy love slowly. And true maturity is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent.